Hello, everyone. We are live. Want to welcome you to the attic of Piedmont Trails. My name is Carol, and you are watching the live stream of Piedmont Trails. Welcome, everyone. Today is November the 28th of 2021, and we just celebrated Thanksgiving, and tonight we're having an open format. The live chat is up and running. I can see the chats and the comments and questions made. And tonight we're having a celebration of our history and genealogy, and would love for you everyone to share their journey to the past with us. I normally prepare a small presentation. I did not do that for this weekend. I wanted it to be more of to hear more from you guys on what you have going on in your world, and you may be studying family history, finding ancestors along the way through the weekend or the past several months, or you may be studying history in a certain area. But we would love to hear from all of you and what your journey to the past has been for the past several months. I have been working on several projects, namely the Great Wagon Road project and several things with Piedmont Trails. We're constantly busy. We are constantly researching. That is an everyday event, pretty much, that goes along with normal day life. And it sometimes is a struggle for us to fit into our schedule time to focus on some of our research when we have other things going on, such as holidays, family gatherings, with Christmas coming up, and plus we have our daily routines. So everyone share your journey and let us hear from you. And you may have material or documentation that you would like for Piedmont Trails to emphasize on in the future. Maybe there are specific topics or an area that you would like to learn more information about that you haven't heard or haven't been able to locate information. Feel free to ask us. You never know what we might have on hand. Piedmont Trails has been around since September of 2017. I have been personally researching with history and genealogy for over 40 years. It is a heart-loving passion that is just naturally dwells within me for the yearning of wanting to know more about the past. And I'm eager to always share what I find with others. And I encourage my friends, my family members, I encourage them to do this as well. They all know this. When they know me personally, they know that I love history and genealogy. And I'm going to share a story or two, or if we get together or whatever. But that's how long Piedmont Trails started, how long it's been around since 2017. It started because of my passion for history and genealogy and wanting to share it. And so I came up with this idea of Piedmont Trails and sharing some of my personal files and things that I've researched through all the years with all of you. I had no idea that it would manifest to what it is today, but it's great and it feels great. And I'm very much rewarded for sharing for what I know. That's the one thing that I ultimately wanted to achieve, and I'm able to do that. And that means pure success for me. I see that we have Rick. Rick Springer says, "Hi, Carol. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope you're doing well. I love your recent post. Thank you." Thank you, Rick. I really enjoyed writing the post about the Cheryl's Path in North Carolina. I've had a lot of people to respond back to me through the Great Wagon Road project, and without them realizing what they were talking about, and especially in certain sections of Iredell County in North Carolina, they were asking questions about a road. And for the most part, I would share as much as I could with them and let them know that, hey, this was Cheryl's Path. And I was very happy to finally get some of that information into an article and actually get it published on Piedmont Trails this past weekend. And thank you, Rick, for your kind words about that. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm sure you could probably add some things to it too. And Rick says, "One question I have about some early trails is how the Cumberland Gap, the Great Wagon Road, and the Wilderness Road are all connected." You know, each one of those roads hold a vast amount of history that date back in some cases, a little bit before the 18th century, primarily in the early 18th century, and then moving forward. The roads, how they link together, they pretty much link together right at near Roanoke, Virginia. And as I don't know if you've heard me say this before, but Roanoke seemed to be the hub of where everybody seemed to congregate whenever they were traveling or migrating or trading supplies. Early fur traders, they all seemed to gather around Stanton River near Roanoke. Back then, it was known as Big Lick, and I'll spell that. It's B-I-G and then L-I-C-K. And it was known for the natural salt licks that were along in this area. Many years before, buffalo would naturally congregate and gather at this area just for those salt licks, and they were natural trails that were made by them and the Native Americans. So for Roanoke, it was a place where several routes branched off from. And from these roads, other roads would emerge. And from this location and moving forward is how the Great Wagon Road and the Wilderness Road and Cumberland Gap are linked together. And we've got I've got some more information I'm going to share with you. I've made a few little notes, but I've got more information about the Wilderness Road that I'll share with you later on before we end this. Brian Sherrill's here with us. Hi, Brian. Thank you for joining us. I have actually met relatives I didn't know I had. They are descended of Samuel Sherrill, who is the brother of my 5th great-granddad, Aquila. That's a good reward for studying the past, in my opinion. Yes, it is. It's a feeling that it's hard to explain to others if they're not really into family history and genealogy. It's hard to explain what it actually feels like when you come across that information. It makes you feel like you're connected, that you've solved a riddle, or you've solved a puzzle, or now your family has just grown. I remember years and years ago when I was struggling to try and locate my 4th great-grandfather. And I knew the vicinity and where he lived, but I did not never know what happened to him. I could not find where he died, when he died. And I could not find his headstone. And as I was driving around one day in Davidson County, North Carolina, I was visiting the local area churches, and this was the thing to do back then. You didn't have your cemetery listings or find a grave online. If you wanted to visit cemeteries, you had to actually go out to them. And even my 2 sons became involved in the conquest of finding this legendary great-grandfather who I couldn't find. And we would spend hours strolling through the cemeteries, and my sons would write the names down of everyone that they came across on the tombstone, write their birth date, their death date, who the names were. And I cherish those notebooks because it's literally notebooks full of cemeteries in North Carolina that we visited. This one particular cemetery was located near Midway in Davidson County. And once it was an old Lutheran church. And the cemetery is very old. And when I realized that when I pulled into the parking lot and seen this huge, overbearing oak tree, it was just gorgeous. And I started strolling through the first 2 rows of the cemetery, and there he was. And the feeling is just like, oh, you gotta be kidding me, there you are. And you tried to explain this. My 2 sons were excited. They was like, oh, that's him, that's him. But then it's like my oldest son, he asked a very important question. He said, it's just a shame, Mom, that we found him, but now we really don't know what happened to him, how he died. He died so young. And wouldn't it be nice if we could ask questions? And yeah, it's amazing the feeling that you feel inside of you when you actually find your ancestor. It's overwhelming. Many times you're filled with so much joy, and you just want to jump up and down. Like about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we found a 450-foot section of the Great Wagon Road, original, intact, on a piece of property in Henry County. And as soon as I saw the picture, I was just, you got to be kidding me. This survived. And the Great Wagon Road Project is working really, really hard to preserve this for all future generations, because it's like a time capsule. It's history that deserves to be remembered. All of our history deserves to be remembered. All of our genealogy deserves to be remembered. It's part of who we are. Brian, I'm very excited that you shared that with Piedmont Trails, and I'm glad that you were able to link Aquila Cheryl to your family tree. The Cheryl family is very extraordinary. In the article that I had written, I only shared just a small sampling of what the Cheryl family had offered to North Carolina once they arrived to the Catawba River area from Virginia. They were one of the first families that settled in this area. And Cheryl's path led from, I want to say, from Mulberry Fields area of Wilkes County, maybe a little over east from that area, and traveled down through Iredell County. They had to have passed through Bryan settlement of Morgan Bryan. And did they all know each other? Well, we can only guess today. Some of the correspondence and store ledgers and things of that nature can shed light on who they communicated with. Church records can do that too. There's so many different records out there that can link you directly to your ancestor, where you can find out more and more about them. You can find out more about their personalities and the decisions that they made. Prime examples through the American Revolutionary War. So, yeah, it's an amazing, amazing journey. I've just made some little tidbit notes here to get us through if we've got little stalls in between of asking questions or writing comments or things like that. The Great Wagon Road Project actually started in October of 2019 from a very small little group of people who were very passionate and 110% believed in the Great Wagon Road and that it should be named as a National Historic Trail. Of all roads in the United States, that is our first main highway. That road was significant in settling the southern colonies. And here's another thing to think about. Because the southern colonies were settled in the time period in that they were, it greatly affected the outcome of the American Revolutionary War. So there's so many different views to look at the Great Wagon Road and other roads, like going into Tennessee and then into Kentucky and to Ohio, Indiana. After the American Revolutionary War, Indiana became a hot spot, especially with the pensions that were due to these American Revolutionary War soldiers who received land in Indiana. One of my ancestors migrated to Indiana. I've had many people to ask, well, which road did they take? Well, by the time of 1785, moving forward to 1790, you have a lot of different roads. But the further west you go, then you can limit exactly which road they may have took, depending on their final destination. But roads always change. I was going to talk a little bit about my family tree, too. I've been researching my family tree, and this doesn't give away my age by any means, but I've been researching my family tree since 1978. It began as a school book report in the 7th grade by my English teacher, Mrs. Tatum, of whom I still hold a great deal of respect for. She actually went into depth with family history and genealogy in our English class, which was back then it was an English class divided by / social studies history class, all mixed together back then. And it was a school report where we were required to It lists at least 3 generations of our family tree. I'd always been interested in history, especially American history, especially things pertaining to the American Revolutionary War. I was very familiar with Paul Revere, John Adams, all the founding fathers at this point, but I wasn't completely familiar with my own family history. Of course, I'd always heard stories from my grandparents and my parents, but it really hit home with me on this project because Mrs. Tatum had assigned us that we needed to investigate. And that was the key word. We needed to investigate into our family history and see what we could learn about these 3 past generations. And it was phenomenal what I had learned simply by asking questions from my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, people that lived in the community near us, and visiting the church and going through the church records in 1978, going through the family cemetery, and then placing the names, and then placing some of the actions and what they did, and understanding that this was a person and they had lived, and this is my relative. So that when that book report started me on a lifelong journey of always seeking and wanting to know of what my ancestors, who they were, what did they stand for, what did they achieve during their lifetime, and what did they leave behind. And so far, I have tens of thousands of names associated with my family tree. I go back to, on the oldest for my surnames would be back to the 14th century with proof. And then once I completed a lot of these names and completed my branches on my family tree, then I wanted to know more about them. I wanted to make them as personal as I could. Anything that I could find out, what did they purchase? Where did they live? What did they do for a living? Where did they go to church? Who did they marry? Things of this nature. And I wanted to know everything that I could and find out about it. And that's what I've done. And it's still ongoing. Someone said, well, I'm finished with my family tree. Someone said this to me in an email the other day. I'm so glad I'm finally completed my family tree. And I was just thinking to myself, I started this in 78, long, long years ago, and I am not near finished with mine. It's ongoing. As long as you want it to keep going, then you have the passion to research, then you'll keep doing it and you'll find the answers. Okay, I don't see any more questions, so I'm not going to make you guys sit here and we're going to stare at each other for back and forth. So I'm going to tell you some things that are coming up on Piedmont Trails for the month of December. And I've got episode number 29 coming up on the podcast. The podcast just celebrated its 2nd anniversary this past summer. And we're usually doing these podcast shows once a month. And I really enjoy doing those. And they vary in subject anywhere from just standard American history to specific areas such as I did one podcast, I think, back in last summer about Rowan County and the craftsmen who lived in that area. I was just doing more research about that this past week, about some new documents that I came across. The cabinet makers, the blacksmiths, the storekeepers, tavern keepers, these were people that were needed in order to survive in North Carolina during the mid-18th century. So their stories and the people hold a vast amount of history that just intrigues me. And very few resources are out there who actually share this on who these people were. The clock makers. I have an ancestor who was living in Friedberg, Moravian community, who had actually leased land from the Moravians in the mid-18th century. And he was a clock maker, and he had traveled from Pennsylvania to North Carolina. And after several years of settling in that community, then he left, and he went further into present-day Forsyth County. And he continued making his clocks, but then by that time he had became a storekeeper and a tavern keeper, and years later he operated an inn. So his life changed a great deal. But we will have a podcast coming up. Let's see, it will be aired between December the 10th and December the 14th. I don't have an exact date when I'll get that completed, but it's probably going to be about the western roads leading into Tennessee and Kentucky, which is what I've been working on for the past couple of weeks. And I'm just about finished with 3 of the main roads that led into this area just right after the American Revolutionary War. This would have been just a little bit after Daniel Boone's expedition and going through that area. Then I'm going to have new articles arriving from the Great Wagon Road Project. This is going to mainly be in December. It's going to come from Henry County, Virginia. And I've got some notes here tonight in case anyone had questions about that area, because we got a huge response about it on Facebook, so I kept them out for tonight. But we're going to be sharing some pictures, some landmarks that have seemed to be forgotten over time, and we're hoping to shed light back on these natural landmarks because they were used as the settlers had traveled through the Great Wagon Road in this area. And this is Henry County, Virginia. And Brian Sherrill says, my interest in this originally derived from an interest in black powder rifles and muskets of the 18th century. It's amazing. It is amazing how what we find interesting, and then it links us to the past in different ways and different paths. It's amazing. We're all unique. We're all different. So I'm going to be sharing articles about Henry County, Virginia from the Great Wagon Road Project. And then I'll also be sharing how families celebrated Christmas, especially during the years of the American Revolutionary War. And, I looked for sources and articles about this, and there wasn't that many out there. So over the years, I've gathered certain information that I think will be enough for a good article on that. And how families, just your regular families that lived like in the Piedmont area, North Carolina, how they celebrated Christmas during the war years of the American Revolution. So that'll be coming up. And I'm going to have much, much more in December. We'll be arriving. To find out all of the details about what we've got going on, visit PiedmontTrails.com. And then each month I'll post updates on what will be arriving and what articles will be coming up. Also check genealogy # off the grid tab on the website. It'll give you more details about what we have going on. Okay. In the next live stream, we're going to hold it on December the 19th. This is on a Sunday, and it's the Sunday before Christmas. And on this next segment for the live stream, I'm going to be sharing more about the trails and the roads that connected into the Great Wagon Road. And there are all kinds, and they're everywhere. They span from Pennsylvania through Maryland, portions of West Virginia, into Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. The Great Wagon Road spans right at 800 miles. So I'm going to be sharing that. I'm going to have a small presentation for our next live stream for that. I wanted to share a little bit of tidbits in case you didn't know. A wagon, someone had asked on the website earlier today, well, how far could a wagon travel in a day, a normal day's travel? It just depends on the landscape. It depends on the terrain, and it also depends on the weather. If you've got flat land and you've got gorgeous sunshiny weather, you can travel from 10 to 20 miles a day. Possibly even more. If you've got bad weather and you've got really, really harsh, rugged roads, then you're talking a whole lot less. So it greatly depends on the landscape. Also, there are many roads, and I wanted to make sure that I share this portion with you. There are many, many early roads and routes that have yet been discovered. And I've got to get together some of these early roads and get them together on the website. And if you'll go to Early Migration Trails, and that page, it will give you it's a good start. It's not nowhere near the amount of what it should be, of all the early roads during the 18th century is what we're talking about here, only the 18th century. But hopefully I'll get some of these other roads. There are a lot of roads that haven't been discovered that were used, that are old, they just primarily disappeared before the Civil War, before the federal period. So we need to get that on there too. Let's see, Rick says, here is an excerpt of our brushy, let me get my glasses on here, I'm sorry, of our Busby family story. Our great-grandfather was Scotch-Irish. He came from Scotland to North Carolina about 1800, moving through the Cumberland Mountains. Does this help? Let's see, and you had originally had a question of how they were linked. There is a pass or a gap. And I can't, let me write this down for you, Rick, and I will get back to you on that because I don't want to tell you wrong. I understand now what you're asking. You're wanting to know from Scotland, North Carolina, around 1800. See that timeline, and then they went to Kentucky. Primarily, they would end up in present-day Pike County. So I don't know where your ancestors, what their final destination was in Kentucky. Let me know that if you can real quick, because that really depends on the answer. Okay. I mentioned that it was about 800 miles for the Great Wagon Road. I don't want to leave out the Kings Highway when we're talking about early roads because it was so important. Rick says he doesn't know. Many of the early trails leading into Kentucky led to present-day Pike County area near Brushy Mountain, Johns Creek, and there's another little Sycamore Creek. If you look on a map, or if you go to Google Earth, or if you go to a modern map and punch in mouth of Sycamore Creek, follow Sycamore Creek in through that area, further going south. Another good map is if you go to Library of Congress, and I can't remember the date of this map, I'm sorry. When you go to the Library of Congress, click on Maps at the top of the tab. Enter in Kentucky and click Search. Go on the left-hand side will be dates, and it will ask you, are you looking for something between 1700 and 1790? Click Yes. Click on that tab. And I think this map actually dates 1784 of what I'm thinking of. I can't remember who the surveyors were of this map, and I can't remember who published it, but it is located on the Library of Congress. This particular map that I'm talking about, you can trace the Sycamore Creek and Johns Creek in the Pike County area. This is where one of the main thoroughfares going into the eastern side of Kentucky, which would be far east from the other trail such as Daniel Boone's Trail, Wilderness Road, and others. This is where that road led to. And I'm going to have more on this in the podcast coming up, as a matter of fact, this coming week. If you have more questions about that, Rick, get a hold of me on, I'll tell you what, leave it as a comment here on the live stream, and I'll get back to you on it, exactly where that map is. And I'll get back to you more details about that road. Okay. All right. And the worst part of the road, the roads in the 18th century were rough. They were rugged. They had deep ruts in them. They're not flat. They're not dirt. They're not, when it flooded, they were filled with mud. And I'm not talking just a little bit of mud, like on the ground that you would normally see, like a regular mud puddle. I'm talking deep mud. This is from all of the families who were traveling this road. It's hard to imagine or explain what the conditions of these early roads really were. And if you were went through a torrential rainstorm, you most likely would have to stop for a while. You wouldn't be able to travel onward. You'd have to wait and let it dry out for a little bit before you continued on your way. It was that bad. Most for the Great Wagon Road, most of the harsh or worst part of the road was from the Stanton River to the Dan River in North Carolina. And I don't want to, how do I want to put that? There have been new discoveries about the Great Wagon Road more further west, or as a cutout from the Great Wagon Road leading away from Roanoke. So I've included Dan River for now, but that may change in the future with the research that we have just conducted during the past month and a half. We're waiting to finalize this for more proof, but that may be the case. But anyway, the road it became extremely rough from Stanton River onward, going south. And that was with all the roads. I wanted to also touch base with Colonial Clothing. And I'm going to do this really quick because Colonial Clothing really tells a lot about a person, especially during that time frame. Now, it's hard to say what our ancestors wore, but I wanted you to take this in consideration. I don't know if many of you are aware, but that the color blue was associated with most of indentured servants. And you would find them wearing the color blue shirt or a blue dress. This signified to most people of colonial society that they were a servant. There were other things that also contributed to that, but I wanted to make sure that I shared that information with you. It seemed like not many people were aware of that. Also, if you're interested in colonial clothing, look into the Puritans. Puritans date back to Thanksgiving, when Thanksgiving originally started. That's what we're told. The Puritans landed in Plymouth Colony. But the Puritans also were very strict in the way that they dressed, and the colors that they wore stood for something. Black was informal, respectful. Green was considered to be filled with hope of life. All the colors meant something in the way of colonial dressing. As you go through history, you'll find bits and pieces of how colonial costumes or the fashions of the day affected families. If they were born of Quakers or they were of the Quaker religion, they also dressed in a certain way. This gives you more insight about your ancestor when you find these things out. Let's see. I had another one to ask me about what was the number one food that the families carried with them while they were traveling on the Great Wagon Road. That'd definitely be corn. It was corn, all corn. That would have been your most popular food would be corn, no doubt. Another popular thing would be dried beans. They would have taken that. That would have been something light. It wouldn't have weighed a lot. And corn. That would have been their main thing that they would have took. I wanted to also reiterate that wagons were not cheap, and these wagons were dear. They did cost dearly back then during the colonial period. And I wanted to also, someone was saying, well, how can we judge on how the wagons could cross or ford a river? The best way you can judge is go by the wheel. The rear wheelbase was 48 inches on the Conestoga wagon. It was 24 inches in the front. This was designed this way because it was easier for the horses or the oxen to pull the weight if the wheels were lowered, and you had less weight in the front and more weight in the back or in the rear. So it made a difference. Then when you remember that 48 inches high wheelbase on the rear and 24 inches on the front, this gives you a guide of how high the water could be for them wagons to tread safely across. This question was brought up when they were crossing the Potomac River at the Pack Horse Ford. And There were also, I wanted to say this too, these were loose fitting axles. These were not tight fitting axles like you see today. They were very loose, very loose. You would have heard them as they were rolling on the road. And you had to grease them constantly. They had to be held in with grease. And you stopped and you would grease your axles about every 30 to 40 miles. Had to. On a flat road too, I wanted to give this scenario. On a flat road, a horse can pull 3 times its weight. Level flat road. If it's a steep road, the horse can pull its weight. Slow going, but he can pull his weight. This gives you a view of how different things would have affected your ancestors while they were on the road. You can kind of experience it. Oh, so they traveled from Augusta County. Now they're moving their way through. They're making their way through Roanoke. Okay, they would have had to stop and grease the axles. Okay, it gives you a little bit more insight of what they experienced. And I also wanted to tell you too that many of the first homes were actually constructed from parts of the wagon. And there was someone who did a really good study of this back in 1928, and I'm sorry the name has left me, but I can see their research papers in front of me right now. They did a complete thorough study from the first cabins in Southern Virginia and in North Carolina and in western sections of South Carolina, where the cabins were constructed of parts of the wagons that actually brought the families there. Some of the families lived in their wagons for the first winter. Most families, they would travel during the fall, early fall months. They would arrive in dead of winter a lot of times. And they would live in these wagons through the winter, building their homes, using parts of the wagon to build their home. In fact, majority of the floors used in log cabins was from the flat slabs of the bed of the wagons. And Rick Springer says, awesome, thanks. You're very more than welcome, Rick. And I understand your frustration in that particular area. A lot of people become frustrated in Kentucky trying to figure out, they were here on the eastern side of Kentucky. They weren't up in the center or up in the northern sections, and I completely understand. And I'll share more insight with you on what I know about that area. And you said, would horses or oxen be more common? Both. They would have used both. And as the roads were widened naturally, then you could picture a major highway, a major thoroughfare, the first national highway of wagons being able to pass each other back and forth, and could even go around each other. So as the thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of families who traveled these roads, they naturally became wider. And then it was amazing of all the traffic that a person would see in 1750, 1760, 1770. It's amazing. Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining me this evening. It's been fun. We'll do more of these short question and answer comments. And I'm sure a lot of you have answers. You're just being shy tonight. It's okay. But yeah, we'll do more of these in the future. Don't forget to visit PiedmontTrails.com, and you'll find out all the details of what's coming up for December. And, if there's something that you would like to see that you think we may have on hand, I have tons of family files, tons of information. Just ask. I'll be more than happy to share with you what I have. Thank you for joining me. I hope you all enjoy your journey to the past. And we'll see you here December 19th. For our next live stream. Thanks and God bless.